Reginald, look at where your hands are! You just made your choice.
3 days later, Celestine came back, and what she does next, he never saw coming.
The sound she remembered first was not the railing giving way. It was glass breaking somewhere behind her. A champagne flute, maybe. Someone laughing too loud near the east wing doors. The smell of gardenia so thick it felt like something you could hold in your hand. Then the railing. Then nothing. 3 days later, Celestine Ardmore-Voss lay in a private hospital room with her left wrist in a cast and a fetal monitor strapped across her belly, and she told the story to the ceiling above her bed. She said, "He looked right at me. I need you to understand that. He looked right at me, and then he turned." She was not telling this to anyone. There was no one in the room to tell it to. She had been alone for 40 minutes. The monitoring equipment beeped in a rhythm that sounded impatient, like something waiting for an answer she had not yet decided to give. She had been 31 years old for 4 months. She had been married to Reginald Voss for 4 years. She had been carrying their daughter for 7 months, and she had been building his empire for longer than any of those numbers accounted for, in ways that no one who attended the annual Voss Foundation gala that night would ever have thought to ask about. She closed her eyes. She went back to the beginning of the evening. The Voss estate terrace was everything Reginald believed a terrace should be. Stone imported from somewhere expensive. Twinkle lights strung through the iron overhead framework. The smell of gardenias from the arrangements below in the garden, where 200 guests moved through the golden light with champagne in their hands, and the particular ease of people who had never once worried about money. Celestine had stood at the railing in a champagne-colored gown and watched the crowd and felt tired in a way that went all the way down to her bones. She had told Reginald she was tired. He had said, "Just 1 more hour, baby. These people need to see you." She had smiled at him. She had always been good at smiling at him. It was one of the first things she learned to do well in their marriage, the performance of ease and contentment, the management of her own exhaustion so that it never became his problem. She said, "All right, 1 more hour." She went to stand at the railing with her glass of sparkling water. She looked out at the garden below. She pressed one hand to her belly where her daughter was rolling slowly, the way she did in the evenings, turning herself in the dark as if getting comfortable. "I know," Celestine said softly. "I know. Almost done." She heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Reginald. It was not Reginald. A woman in a black dress was moving fast through the terrace doors, her face aimed down at the phone in her hand, her heels catching on the uneven stone. She looked up. Their eyes met. For 1/2 second, they were just two women surprised to find each other on a dark terrace. Then the woman's heel caught the raised lip of a loose stone. She stumbled forward. Her hand shot out. It caught Celestine's arm with the full weight of someone trying not to fall. The momentum shifted. Celestine grabbed the railing with her free hand to stop herself. The railing moved. Not the way railings are supposed to move. Not a flex, not a give. A full loose shift. Like something that had been waiting for exactly this moment to let go. Then it gave. Celestine fell 7 feet onto the lower garden wall. She heard the sound of it before she felt it. A dense, heavy sound. Then the pain arrived, enormous and immediate, in her wrist and her head and somewhere lower that she refused to think about. She lay still, she breathed. The baby moved. Thank God, the baby moved. She looked up. Reginald was on the terrace. He was standing at the place where the railing used to be. He was looking down at her. His hands were wrapped around the waist of the woman in the black dress. Both of them. Both of his hands. He had steadied the woman in the black dress. His pregnant wife was 7 feet below him on the stone garden wall, and he had chosen to steady the woman in the black dress. Celestine lay on the ground and looked up at her husband and understood something she would spend the next 3 days trying to unknow. She watched the woman press her face into Reginald's chest. She watched Reginald close his eyes. She said later, to the ceiling of her hospital room, "He saw me. He saw me right there on the ground, and his hands did not move." Then she went out. She woke in the private room. Stiff sheets. The smell of antiseptic underneath something floral someone had tried to use to cover it. A nurse named Terry with a soft voice came in and checked her vitals and told her the family had been notified and someone was on the way. Celestine said, "I'm fine." She always said that. Terry smiled gently and said she would be back in 20 minutes. The door closed. Celestine lay in the quiet and replayed the terrace for the first time. She replayed it the way you replay something you cannot believe happened, from every angle, looking for the version where it means something different. There was no other version. His hands were on Vanessa. She did not yet know the name Vanessa. She would learn it in 40 hours. But she already knew the shape of what she had seen, and she already knew that the shape of it would not change no matter how many times she turned it over. The baby kicked. One solid, decisive kick, directly into the lower left of her rib cage. "All right," Celestine said quietly. "All right, I hear you." She pressed the call button for the nurse. When Terry came back in, Celestine asked if the hospital had a phone she could use. Terry brought her a handset. Celestine dialed from memory. The phone rang twice. Shanice answered. She said, "Cel, what's wrong?" Not a question. Because Shanice Dupree had known Celestine Ardmore for 24 years, and Shanice knew the difference between a social call and a call made from somewhere cold. Celestine said, "I fell. At the gala. I'm in the hospital. The baby's okay." Silence on the other end, a very specific silence. The kind that meant Shanice was doing the thing she did when she needed to think before she spoke. Then Shanice said, "I'm coming." Celestine said, "You don't have to." Celestine Ardmore, Shanice said. She used her maiden name, "I'm coming." Celestine pressed her lips together. Her eyes filled slowly, the way water fills something with a slow leak. She blinked. "Okay," she said. "Okay." She hung up. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about how she had gotten her nails done the morning of the gala because there would be photographs. She thought about how she had told her mother that morning she was happy. She thought about how her mother had said, "You sure, baby?" And how she had said, "Yes, Mama," without hesitation, because that is the only way to say something you need to believe, but don't quite. 53 minutes after she was admitted, Reginald Voss walked through the door. He was still in his gala clothes. He smelled like gardenias and something else. Something light and floral that was not her perfume. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her undamaged hand. He said her name like a prayer. "Celestine. Baby. Thank God." She watched his face. The relief was real. She had studied this man's face for 4 years the way you study something you love. She knew every variation. The relief was real, but there was something behind it. Something careful. Something already managing, she said. "Where were you?" Not a question. He said he was with the paramedics. He said he was directing them to her. He said he never left the terrace until she was loaded into the ambulance. She said, "I know what I saw, Reginald." He paused. Half a second. Just long enough for her to measure it. Then he said, "You were in shock, baby. You hit your head." She did not argue. She let go of his hand. She turned her face to the window. She thought, "I know what I saw, and I'm going to spend the next 3 days convincing myself I didn't. Because I have to. Because I have a baby coming. Because I don't know yet what I'm going to do with what I know." She closed her eyes. She thought, "But I know what I saw." She was not going to forget it. Not tonight, not ever. Outside the window, the city was completely indifferent to all of it. Cars moving, lights on in distant buildings. People living their ordinary lives in the particular mercy of not knowing what had just happened on a terrace at the Voss estate, and what it was going to cost a woman who had already been paying for a very long time. The Voss family arrived the next morning in formation. Reginald's mother, Dolores, brought flowers that made Celestine nauseous. She set them near the window and kissed Celestine's forehead and said, "You gave us all such a fright, darling," in the voice she used for situations that required dignity above all other things. Reginald's business partner, Curtis, brought a fruit basket and shook Reginald's hand in a way that Celestine watched with new eyes. There was something transferred in that handshake, some shared understanding between 2 men. She could not name it. She filed it. Marlene Voss Hutchins did not come. Marlene and Reginald had not spoken in 6 years. But Celestine thought about her. She had always liked Marlene. By noon, the room was full of people who loved Reginald. Shanice arrived at 12:15. She walked through the cluster of Voss family members, the way she walked through every room she had ever been in directly, without apology, with the focused intention of someone who knew exactly who she was there for. She sat beside Celestine's bed. She took her hand. She said nothing. She just sat there. Reginald noticed. He and Shanice had never liked each other, a fact they both managed with the careful politeness of people committed to not causing a scene in front of the person they both loved. After a while, Shanice said, "You should all let her rest." She said it looking at Celestine, but she said it for the room. After a long moment, people began gathering their coats. When the door closed, the room was quiet for the first time. Shanice turned to Celestine and said, "Talk to me." Celestine was quiet. She looked at the window. She looked at her cast. She looked at the fetal monitor, which was still beeping its impatient rhythm. She said, "I need you to not react. I need you to just listen. Can you do that?" Shanice said, "I'll try." That was the most honest thing anyone said to Celestine that week. Celestine told her all of it. The terrace, the railing, the woman in the black dress, Reginald's face, hands. The 43 seconds when he stood above her and his choice became visible. Shanice sat absolutely still. Her jaw was very tight. She breathed slowly through her nose, the way she breathed when she was managing something she felt very strongly. When Celestine finished, Shanice said, "What do you need from me right now?" Not, "I told you." Not, "Let's call a lawyer." Not, "I never liked him." Just, "What do you need from me right now?" Celestine started crying. The first real crying since the fall. Contained and quiet, barely making a sound. She said, "I need someone to believe me. I need one person to believe what I saw." Shanice said, "I believe you." No hesitation. "I have always believed you." That night, after visiting hours ended and Reginald had gone home to manage the foundation's press coverage, Celestine was alone again. She took her phone off the nightstand. She opened her contacts. She scrolled to Reginald's name. She looked at it for a long time. She had called this number almost every day for 4 years. When she landed after a flight, when she closed a deal, when she was scared, when she needed to hear a voice that felt like home. She put the phone face down on the sheet. She did not call. She checked it again 3 minutes later. Then again. Then she got up carefully, ignoring the nurse's instruction, and set it on the windowsill across the room where she could not reach it without getting up again. She lay back. She thought, "I keep reaching for him. Even now. Lord, even now." She thought, "I don't know how to stop reaching for him." She thought, "I don't know what I am when I'm not reaching for him." She pressed both hands flat on her belly. She thought, "But I know what I saw." The next morning, she asked a nurse for her laptop. She opened 12 browser tabs. She was looking for the woman in the black dress. It took her 40 minutes. Vanessa Okafor, event coordinator, owner of Okafor and Associates Event Management, contracted by the Voss Foundation for 3 consecutive years. Celestine looked at Vanessa's website for a long time. The professional photograph, the easy smile, the tagline that read, "Every event tells a story." She clicked to the contact page. She closed the laptop. She thought, "I knew. Lord, I knew. I just didn't want to know." She counted backward. 3 years of contracted work. 3 years of Reginald personally managing those events when he personally managed nothing. 3 years of calls taken in hallways. 3 years of last-minute schedule changes explained away by business, by timing, by the particular machinery of a man who was very good at explaining things away. She thought, "I knew. I just loved him more than I trusted myself." Her obstetrician came in that afternoon. Dr. Amara Washington was a warm woman with close cropped hair and calm, careful hands. She reviewed the baby's status. Stable but complicated. There was risk of premature labor. Bed rest was essential. Reduced stress was essential. Dr. Washington said the word stress and paused. She looked at Celestine with the eyes of a woman who had sat in enough hospital rooms to recognize pain that had nothing to do with a fall. She said, "Is there anything you want to talk about that's not on the chart?" Celestine said no. Dr. Washington held her eyes for a moment. She wrote something on the chart. Before she left, she placed one hand briefly on Celestine's arm. She said, "You are allowed to ask for help. That is not weakness, that is good sense." She left. Celestine looked at her arm where the doctor's hand had rested. She was not used to being touched gently. Reginald was not a gentle man. Not unkind exactly, but physical in the way of men who move through the world expecting it to yield to them. He touched her like something he owned. She had never said that out loud. She said it now inside her own mind for the very first time. That evening, Shanice showed her Reginald's press statement on her phone. He had released it without telling Celestine it was coming. It was warm and carefully worded. It thanked first responders. It called Celestine the light of my life and my greatest blessing. It attributed the accident to a faulty railing and announced a donation to the hospital foundation. It did not mention Vanessa Okafor. It did not mention who else was on the terrace. It did not mention the 43 seconds. Celestine read it twice. Her financial mind, the part of her that had built models for his acquisitions and could read what a number was hiding as easily as what it said, read the statement the same way. She thought, "This is a settlement offer. He's telling the world a story before I can tell a different one." She saved a screenshot. She would need it later. That night she wrote in the notes application on her phone. Not a diary. Just words she needed to put somewhere outside her body. She wrote, "I am not crazy. I did not imagine it. I did not misread it because I was scared or in pain or in shock. I have been reading situations accurately my whole life. I read financial statements other people miss. I saw exactly what happened on that terrace." She paused. She wrote, "I am not a hysterical woman. I am not bitter. I am not making this bigger than it is." She paused again. She wrote, I am a 31-year-old woman who fell 7 feet while pregnant because a railing failed, and the man who vowed to protect me was standing at the top, and he chose to protect someone else. She wrote, "That is not bitterness. That is just what happened." She wrote, "Lord, give me the clarity to see this clearly, and the strength to do what I need to do with what I see." She put the phone down. Outside, the city continued its indifferent business. Inside the room, Celestine Ardmore-Voss breathed slowly and let herself know what she knew. She was going to need every bit of herself for what was coming next. She was discharged on day 4. Reginald sent a car. She got in. The driver took her through the gates of the Voss estate and around the circular drive, and she walked through the front door of the home she had lived in for 4 years. The gardenias from the gala were still in the foyer. She stood for a moment and looked at them. Then she walked to Reginald's home office. She had a key. She had always had a key. He gave it to her early in their marriage as a gesture of trust, and she had never questioned why he trusted her with this particular access. She sat down at his desk. She opened his laptop. She knew the password. She had chosen it years ago, the name of his childhood neighborhood, because he had asked her to pick something he would remember. She opened the financial files she had helped structure. She was looking for the Okafor and Associates contractor payments. She found them in 20 minutes. $4,700,000. Moved through foundation channels over 3 fiscal years. Some of it went to legitimate event coordination services. Celestine could see this clearly. She had built the accounting structure herself, and she could read it the way a person reads their own handwriting. But some of it did not go to event services. She sat with this for a moment. She breathed. Then she found the folder. It was labeled with her initials, CAV. Inside was a legal document. A prenuptial agreement she remembered signing. But beneath the pages she remembered was an addendum. 3 pages. Dense legal language. She read it carefully, the way she read everything. The addendum limited her claim to marital assets in cases of voluntary abandonment of the marital home. She read it again. Then a third time. She thought, he was building a case against me. Before I knew there was a case, she thought he was always going to leave. He just needed me to go first. She photographed every page, slowly, carefully, every single page. She closed the laptop. She replaced everything exactly as she had found it. She walked out of the office. She went to the kitchen. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat at the island where she had eaten 1,000 breakfasts and looked out at the garden where the broken railing had already been replaced. Already. 4 days. The railing was already replaced. She thought he destroyed the evidence. She took out her phone and photographed the new railing through the window. She drank her tea. She was done grieving. She was beginning to plan. That afternoon, she drove herself to the neighborhood where she grew up. 40 minutes from the estate. She parked on the street in front of the house that used to be her grandmother's. Different family lived there now. Different curtains in the windows. Same porch. Same wooden steps. Same pecan tree in the yard that her grandmother had called my tree as though the whole yard belonged to it. She sat in the car with the engine running. She thought about her grandmother. Celestine I, the woman she was named for. Granny Cel, who worked the overnight shift at the hospital laundry for 31 years and came home and still made biscuits. Who had a husband who came and went like seasons nobody could predict. Who built a home anyway. Who built something warm inside 4 walls that did not always belong to her. Who told her, baby, the only thing they can never take from you is what you built inside yourself. Celestine looked at the porch. She said out loud, "Okay, Granny. Okay, I hear you." A little girl came out the front door. Maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. She sat on the porch steps and held her face up to the afternoon sun like it was the best thing in the world. Celestine watched her for a long time. Then she put the car in drive. The memories came in the following days, not in chronological order, in emotional order, the brain retrieving what it needed when it needed it, laying things out for her to look at in a new light. She remembered the first year of their marriage when she was still at her finance firm, and Reginald was scaling his second real estate fund. She remembered how he started bringing her to his meetings. He would say, "My wife, Celestine, smartest person in any room she walks into." She remembered how the men in those rooms looked at her with surprise and then, quickly, with respect, because she earned it in the first 10 minutes every single time. She remembered when she left the firm. She remembered how it had been framed as her choice. She wanted to focus on the marriage, on the family they were planning. She had not felt pushed. She had felt chosen. But she remembered now that every conversation leading to that decision had been initiated by Reginald, always returning to the same idea, how much easier things would be. How much more they could build together if she was not divided. She thought, he asked me to build for him, and I called it love. She remembered the Voss Foundation, her idea entirely, the community development focus, her framework, the accounting architecture, her design. She remembered presenting it to his board as Reginald's vision, because that was how they had divided things. He was the face, she was the mind, and she had believed that was a partnership. She thought, I gave him my mind. I handed it to him and told him to put his name on it. She was not angry at herself for this. Not fully angry at him either. Not yet. She was grieving. Grieving the version of the story she had believed. The partnership that had been real, because some of it was real. She knew this. She had loved him. He may have loved her, in whatever way he was capable of love. She thought some of it was real, and some of it was never real at all. She thought both of those things are true, she thought, and I have to live inside both of them. Shanice came to stay. She took a week off work without explaining herself to anyone. She arrived at the estate with a bag and installed herself in the guest room. Reginald was not comfortable with this. He said things like, I can take care of Celestine, you know. She is my wife. Shanice said, I know she is. She did not leave. In the evenings, while Reginald was in his office, Shanice and Celestine sat on the screen porch off the kitchen, and Shanice did Celestine's hair. She did not press it. She detangled and conditioned and braided it back soft, the way she used to do in high school. Celestine sat between her knees and stared out at the darkening garden. Shanice said, You're planning something. Yes, Celestine said. Do you want to tell me? Not yet, Celestine said. I need to know more first. Okay, Shanice said. She kept braiding. This was what sisterhood looked like. Not demand. Not pressure. Not the words I told you so. Just I'm here. I'll wait. I'll braid your hair while you figure it out. Reginald performed beautifully over those 2 weeks. He brought her tea. He researched premature birth outcomes and shared reassuring statistics. He held her hand at her appointments. He told everyone what a remarkable woman his wife was. He did not mention Vanessa. He did not mention the addendum. He did not mention the 43 seconds. He acted perfectly as though none of it existed, as though performance sustained long enough eventually becomes the truth. She watched him and understood that this was not guilt. This was management. He was controlling the narrative until the narrative became real. She thought he believes if he acts like it didn't happen long enough, I will eventually agree with him. She thought he thinks he knows me. She thought he knew the woman I was before I fell. She thought he is about to meet someone different. One evening she sat in the nursery she had spent 3 months designing. Soft sage walls, a white crib she had chosen herself, a shelf of books she had been reading aloud to her belly for 6 weeks. She sat in the rocking chair and looked at all of it. She thought, I built this. I built this room. I built the foundation. I built the accounting structure. I built the vision that made him look brilliant. She rocked slowly, she thought, and I built a child. Inside my body, she thought, somewhere along the way I stopped existing to myself. I became the architecture of someone else's life, and I called it a partnership. She looked at the crib, she thought, she is going to know her mother exists. She is going to know that her mother had a name before she had a husband. She thought, and she is going to see that her mother knew when to go. Then her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. It read, he lied about the railing too. Call me M. She stared at the text for 1 full day before she did anything about it. She ran the number through a reverse lookup application on her laptop. The result came back registered to a business address in Charleston, South Carolina. The business, M. Voss Hutchins Consulting, LLC, Marlene. She called from Shanice's phone because she was no longer naive about who might be watching what. Marlene picked up on the first ring. She said, I was wondering how long it would take. Her voice was like Reginald's in its depth and its certainty, but where Reginald's voice performed, Marlene simply stated, there was no music in it, no management, just information and the quiet willingness to share it. Celestine said, tell me what you know. Marlene said, I know several things, but first I need to know something from you. What? Did you love him, Marlene said. Genuinely. Or was it always about the money? Celestine was quiet for a moment. It was intrusive. It was also a test. Marlene was deciding whether Celestine was worth trusting. Celestine said, I loved him. Genuinely. Which is why this is so difficult. Marlene said, good. Then you are nothing like him, and you deserve to know the truth. She talked for 45 minutes. Reginald had done this before. Not a terrace, not a pregnancy, but the same architecture. A woman who had been a business partner 6 years before he met Celestine. She brought capital and clients to a joint venture. After 3 years, she found herself legally outside the ownership structure she had helped build. because Reginald's attorneys had been rewriting documents in small, incremental ways that were individually difficult to challenge. That woman lost her business. She moved away. Marlene had found out. She confronted Reginald. He cut her out of his life the same week. Celestine listened to all of this without speaking. When Marlene finished, Celestine said, "The railing. You said he lied about the railing." Marlene paused. She said carefully, "The railing on that terrace was flagged in a maintenance report 14 months ago. I have a copy." Reginald received it. He signed the report confirming receipt. He did not authorize repairs. Celestine's heart went very still. She said he knew. He knew the railing was compromised, Marlene confirmed. "I am not saying he planned what happened. I will never say that. But I am saying he knew there was a risk and he chose not to address it. And then he replaced it 4 days after I fell," Celestine said. "Yes," Marlene said. The silence between them lasted a long time. Celestine said, "Why are you telling me this?" Marlene said, "Because you built what he is claiming. And because you are carrying a baby who deserves a mother who wins." She paused, then she said, "And because he is my brother, and I love him. And I cannot watch him do this to another woman and say nothing." Again, that night Celestine could not sleep. It was 2 in the morning, and Reginald was in bed down the hall, and the house was completely quiet, and she went to the kitchen and pulled everything out of the spice cabinet. All of it. 43 jars and tins and bottles arranged on the kitchen island in the order she removed them. She reorganized them alphabetically, then by cuisine. Then she wiped down every shelf. Then she relabeled 3 containers whose labels had faded. Her hands were shaking slightly. She labeled them anyway. Small, careful letters in her handwriting. At 3 in the morning, she was sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, and her legs stretched out and both hands pressed flat on her belly. Her daughter was doing her nighttime rolling, the slow, deliberate movement that had become the most reliable rhythm in Celestine's world. She said quietly, Hey, I'm here." The baby moved. She said, "I'm scared." She said it out loud, to her daughter, to the empty kitchen, to God and to her grandmother's memory, and to every woman who had ever sat on a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning trying to decide what to do with what she knew. She said, "I am so scared. But I am not staying." She said, "I cannot stay," she said. "And I need you to know that leaving has nothing to do with not loving you. I am leaving because of how much I love you. I am leaving so you never see your mother choose being lied to over being free." She put her hand on the cabinet and pushed herself to her feet. She went upstairs. She started packing a bag, very quietly, very carefully, only what could not be replaced. 3 days after the call with Marlene, Celestine did something no one expected. She called Vanessa Okafor. From a prepaid phone Shanice had purchased without being asked why. Vanessa answered cautiously. "Unknown number. Evening call." Celestine said, "This is Celestine Voss. I don't want to fight with you. I want to talk." A long silence. Vanessa said, "I don't know what you want me to say." Celestine said, "I want you to tell me how long it has been." Another silence. Vanessa said, 3 years. Almost 4. Celestine closed her eyes. Almost the entirety of their marriage. She said, "Did he tell you he was going to leave me?" Vanessa said yes. Then more quietly, every 6 months, for 3 years, he told me it was almost over, that he was waiting for the right time. Celestine felt something she did not expect. Grief for Vanessa. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never, but grief. Because Vanessa was also a woman who had believed what a man told her. Celestine understood that particular weight from the inside. She said, "He lied to both of us." Vanessa did not respond. Celestine said, "I'm not calling to blame you. I'm calling because I think you should know the financial structure of his foundation. Some of it runs through your firm. $4,700,000 over 3 years. When this comes apart, and it is coming apart, his attorneys are going to need someone to blame. I want you to protect yourself." Silence. Vanessa said, "Why are you telling me this?" Celestine said, "Because I am not doing to you what he did to me." She hung up. The Voss Foundation's quarterly board meeting was 3 weeks later. Celestine had always attended. She attended this one. She sat at the table in her usual seat. Her wrist was still in its cast. She looked impeccable. She always looked impeccable. Reginald presented the quarter's financial summary. It was her work, reorganized and relabeled and presented in his voice. She had been watching him do this for years and calling it partnership. Today she watched him do it and called it something different. When he finished and opened the floor to questions, Celestine raised her hand. He looked at her. Something shifted behind his eyes. He said warmly, "Celestine." "Of course." She asked one question, calm, precise, the way she asked every question in every boardroom she had ever been in. She asked about the accounting structure of the contractor payments over the last 3 fiscal years and whether the board had reviewed the documentation on Okafor and Associates. The room shifted, not visibly, but she felt it, the slight change in air pressure, the quality of attention sharpening. Reginald's smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did. He said, "We can review that in a follow-up session." Smooth, immediate. Celestine said, "Of course, I just want to make sure the board is aware of everything they should be aware of." She smiled. He smiled. The room saw 2 people smiling at each other. Celestine and Reginald saw a declaration of war. She thought, walking out of that building, "I deserve love that does not cost me my dignity." She thought, "I deserved a partner, not a performance." She thought, "And I am done performing back." She gave him one warning, public, invisible to everyone who was not looking for it. He knew she was moving. He did not know how far she had already gotten, and he did not know that his sister was waiting for Celestine's next call. 3 weeks after the board meeting, on a Tuesday at 6 in the morning, Celestine Voss took a bag she had been packing in small, daily increments and carried it to Shanice's car in the Circle Drive. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter. She did not leave a note. She did not confront Reginald. She did not cry on the way out. She had spent her tears on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning. She had used that grief for its purpose. She was not wasting more of it on her exit. She got into the passenger seat. Shanice was already behind the wheel. Shanice pulled out of the driveway without speaking. They were on the highway for 40 minutes before either of them said anything. Shanice said, "You okay?" Celestine said, "No." Shanice said, "Good. That means you're honest." They drove. The morning was gray and cool, and the highway stretched ahead of them through Georgia pine forests and red clay cuts in the landscape. Celestine watched it pass with the particular attention of someone committing something to memory. She thought about the house she was leaving, beautiful and expensive, and belonging to Reginald in some essential way that a home should not belong to just one person. It had always been his stage set. She had just very well-placed furniture. She thought about how she would not miss the furniture. She thought about how she would miss some mornings. The specific quality of light in the kitchen at 7 in the morning. The garden in early spring when the azaleas were loud and brief and perfect. The way the whole estate smelled after rain. She would miss the things that were real. She was not pretending none of it was real. 4 hours into the drive, they stopped for gas somewhere in the middle of Georgia. Celestine got out and stood at the pump and felt the morning air, which was warm now and smelled like pine resin and red clay and something faint and sweet from a stand of honeysuckle along the fence line. Gospel music was coming from someone's car 3 pumps over. She couldn't hear it clearly. Just the melody, just the shape of it, moving through the August air like something that knew exactly where it was going. She stood there longer than she needed to. She thought about Sunday mornings, pressing her hair the night before church because she had to look composed. Standing in the Voss family pew, third from the front on the left side, with Reginald's hand at the small of her back and 200 eyes reading them like a story they were performing. She thought about how much energy it had taken to look together, every Sunday, for 4 years. She thought about how she would not do that anymore. She did not know yet what she would do instead. She did not know who she was without the performance. She had not been Celestine Ardmore since she was 27 years old. She thought, "I need to find out who I am when nobody is watching." The gospel melody faded as the car at the other pump pulled away. She got back into Shanice's car. Shanice said, "Ready?" Celestine said, "No. Let's go anyway." Odessa Ardmore opened her front door at 10:30 that night to find her daughter on the porch, 7 months pregnant, cast on her left wrist, one bag. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say what happened. She did not say, "What are people going to say?" She opened the door wider and stepped back. She wrapped her arms around her daughter, cast and belly and all, and she held on. Odessa smelled like cocoa butter and hair grease and something faintly floral, the same lotion she had been wearing since Celestine was 4 years old. Some things your body knows before your mind catches up. Celestine made a sound she could not contain. Not crying exactly, something older than crying, something that had been waiting in her chest since she lay on the garden wall and looked up at her husband's hands. Odessa did not shush her. She did not tell her it would be all right. She just held on. She said, "You're here now. That's enough for tonight." The weeks that followed were the quietest of Celestine's adult life. She was in her mother's house, in the room that had been her room at 15. A twin bed with a chenille spread, a window that looked out at a pecan tree, her daughter pressing against her ribs at night like a reminder that she was not alone in this body. She lay in that room and she let herself be still, not comatose, not checked out, present, but not moving. letting herself be a body that had been through something enormous, that was carrying another body, that was allowed, for a little while, simply to rest. Odessa brought her food, real food, butter beans and cornbread, sweet potato soup, rice and gravy the way her grandmother made it, food that cost love instead of money, which was its own kind of nourishment. She ate, she slept, she cried when she needed to. Sometimes in the middle of the night with her face in the pillow so her mother did not hear. Sometimes in the afternoon light quietly, for no specific reason except that there was finally room for it. One evening she called Reginald's number, just to see what it felt like now. He picked up on the second ring and said her name in the voice that used to stop her heart. She listened for 5 seconds. Then she set the phone face down and did not pick it up again that night. She wrote in her notes application, she wrote, "I am not a strong black woman right now. I am not his asset, and I am not the public face of anything, and I am not holding this family together." She wrote, "I am just a woman, and I am breaking, and that is allowed." She paused. Then she wrote, "I did not know that before now, that I was allowed." 6 weeks after she arrived at her mother's house, 3 weeks before her due date, she woke at 2 in the morning to a feeling she had not felt before. She called Shanice, who had driven down to be present for this moment, and said, "I think it's time." Shanice said, "You think or you know?" Celestine said, "I know." The hospital was 40 minutes away. Shanice drove. Odessa was in the back seat holding Celestine's hand. The night was very dark and the radio played low and a slow song moved through the car that none of them recognized. Celestine said to her mother, "Talk to me." Odessa said, "I am so proud of you." Celestine said, "Mama, I haven't done anything yet." Odessa said, "You got in the car. 6 weeks ago, you got in that car. That was something. Don't let anyone tell you different." Celestine closed her eyes through a contraction. She said, "What if I'm not ready?" Odessa said, "You're not. Nobody ever is. You do it anyway." Aria Celestine Ardmore was born at 4:57 in the morning, 5 pounds, 3 ounces, 3 weeks early. Excellent lungs. The nurses said this with a smile that meant she made her presence known immediately and with conviction. They placed her on Celestine's chest. Celestine held her. The world reorganized itself around this small, certain, furious, perfect person, quietly and completely and all at once. Celestine whispered, Hey, I'm your mama." Aria made a sound, not a cry, something more like a declaration. Celestine said, I know, we're going to be fine." She looked up. Odessa was crying openly. Shanice was crying while pretending she was not, which meant her mascara was destroyed and she refused to acknowledge it. Celestine looked back down at her daughter. She said, "We're going to be more than fine. We're going to be free." 2 days later, at 3 in the morning with Aria asleep in the rolling bassinet beside her, Celestine called the therapist Dr. Washington had recommended weeks earlier. It went to voicemail. Of course. She left a message anyway. She said, "This is Celestine Ardmore. Dr. Washington referred me. I know it's the middle of the night. I just had my baby 2 days ago and I'm sitting here and I realize that I don't know how to do this next part. Not the baby part. I can figure out the baby part. The me part. I don't know who I am starting over at 31. She paused. She said, "I just need someone to ask me how I'm doing. Not how the baby is. Not how the case is going. Just how I'm doing." She paused again. She said, "Anyway, I'll call back at a normal hour. Sorry. Good night." She hung up. She looked at her daughter. She said, Okay, we're figuring this out." Meanwhile, Reginald had filed a police report. He claimed she had abandoned the marital home, which activated the addendum. He had gone to the press with a story about a wife who disappeared and left him to grieve alone. But Celestine had been preparing for this, and Preston Caldwell had been very, very busy. 8 months later, Aria was 7 months old. She laughed now. She reached for things. She had her grandmother Odessa's cheekbones and Celestine's eyes, and she was the best thing in any room she was ever in, which so far had been modest rooms in her grandmother's house, and a therapist waiting room, and a park near the neighborhood where Celestine had grown up. Celestine had been in therapy with Dr. Amani Hargrove for 6 months. She had slept in her own body again. She had learned to eat meals without calculating how they would look. She had gone 3 weeks without dreaming about the terrace. She had also been working. Preston Caldwell was a compact, careful man in his 50s who spoke in complete sentences and never wasted one. He had been her attorney for 7 months, and in that time she had watched him dismantle Reginald Voss's legal strategy with the methodical precision of someone diffusing something that had been designed to go off. He had challenged the addendum on 3 grounds: procedural irregularity in the signing, material misrepresentation at the time of signing, and duress. He had filed counterclaims regarding the misappropriation of the foundation's financial structure, which Celestine could document was her intellectual creation through emails and drafts, and 3 witnesses from her former firm who confirmed she had presented the framework before she ever married Reginald. He had obtained the maintenance report Marlene provided and filed it with the civil complaint regarding the terrace. She sat across from him in his office on a Thursday morning with Aria in the carrier against her chest, and he looked at her over his glasses and said, "He is not having a good year." Celestine said, "Good." He said, "You understand this is going to get messier before it resolves." She said, "I know." He said, "He has resources." She said, "So do I. I built them." Preston looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded and turned back to the file. That Saturday, Celestine was in her mother's kitchen making sweet potato pie, her grandmother's recipe, never written down, learned entirely by watching. The particular ratio of sweet potato to butter to spice that lived in Celestine's hands and not on any page. Aria was in the bouncy seat on the counter. She was watching her mother with enormous, interested eyes, the serious, concentrated gaze of a person who understood that something important was happening and intended to learn from it. The kitchen smelled like butter and cinnamon and vanilla. Gospel music came from the small radio on the refrigerator, not loud, just present, a thread of melody through the warm morning air. Celestine measured the sweet potatoes by feel the way her grandmother had. She talked to Aria while she worked. She said, "Your great-great-grandmother made this for every holiday and every hard time and every celebration." She said sweet potato pie is a way of saying, "I love you and we are still here." Both things at once. Aria blew a bubble. Celestine said exactly. She folded the filling. She thought about her grandmother's hands. She thought about her mother's hands. She thought about her own hands. The left wrist fully healed now. The faint ache that came back in cold weather, the only evidence of the fall. She thought, "I spent so long being strong for everyone else." She pressed the crust into the dish. She thought, "Nobody asked if I was okay." She slid the pie into the oven. She picked up her daughter and held her in the warm kitchen and swayed slowly to the gospel song. She said, "We're okay. We really are going to be okay." Mother Bernita Shaw called on a Wednesday. Celestine almost did not answer. She was not ready for the prayer chain. She was not ready to be the topic of the third pew conversations that moved through the church like weather. But she answered, because it was Mother Bernita. And you answered Mother Bernita. Mother Bernita said, "I've been thinking about you, baby." Her voice was exactly the same as it had been for 40 years. Low, certain, slightly raspy. The voice of a woman who had earned her authority 1 decade at a time. Celestine said, "Yes, ma'am." Mother Bernita said, "I want you to know something. Your mother raised you right, and you are doing right. And the whole church sees it." Celestine said, "He's been saying things." Mother Bernita said, "I know what he's been saying, and I know what's true. We all know what's true. We knew before you did, baby. Some things only take time to confirm." Celestine was quiet. Mother Bernita said, "You come back when you're ready. And when you do, you walk in, you hold your head up, and you sit in your grandmother's seat." Celestine's throat closed. She managed to say, "Third pew. Left side." Mother Bernita said, "Right where Celestine the First sat for 60 years. It's waiting." With Preston's help, and documentation from Marlene, and testimony from her former colleagues, Celestine filed a civil suit asserting co-ownership and intellectual property rights over the Voss Foundation's financial architecture. She filed for divorce on her terms, contesting the addendum. She filed an amended complaint regarding the terrace, citing the maintenance report. She did not go to the press. She let the filing speak. Legal documents were public record. The press found them on their own, the way the press always found things that were sitting in plain sight. The story broke on a Thursday morning. Celestine was in her mother's kitchen when her phone began to ring. She watched it for a moment. She turned it face down. She poured herself a cup of coffee. She thought, whatever happens next, I told the truth. I stood in the truth and I filed it and I let it be public and I am not ashamed of any part of it. She thought, that is all I can do. She thought, that is enough. Reginald called 17 times that morning. She did not answer the first 16. She answered the 17th because she had decided she was done being afraid of his voice. He was measured, controlled. He said, "Celestine, we can fix this. Whatever you think you know, whatever Marlene told you, we can sit down. We can resolve this privately. You know I have always taken care of you." Celestine said, "You left me on the ground." A pause. He said, "You hit your head." She said, "I did not hit my head until after I had already watched you hold her. I have told you what I saw. I have told you once. I will not argue with you about my own memory again." He said, "Celestine." She said, "I want you to hear me clearly. Not because I'm angry. Because I want you to understand what it is. She said, I built the accounting structure of your foundation. I can document every decision I made. I have the emails. I have the drafts. I have 3 witnesses. The addendum your attorneys wrote will not survive a challenge because I did not sign it knowingly, and I can prove that. I have the maintenance report. I have photographs of the new railing installed 4 days after I fell. She said, I am not asking for anything you did not already owe me. I built it. I want what I built. She paused, and she said in Reginald, for the record, I loved you. Genuinely, I loved you the whole time. She said, I just loved myself more. She hung up. She stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen. Her hands were not shaking. She noticed this specifically. Her hands were not shaking. She said out loud, all right, 8 months of legal work, 8 months of filings and counterfilings and depositions, and one Friday afternoon when Preston called to tell her that Reginald's attorneys had deposed her former colleague Marcus, and Marcus had confirmed, under oath, every detail of the framework she had presented to Reginald's board before their wedding. Now a conference room, downtown, 10th floor. Big windows looking out at a city that did not know or care what was being decided inside this room. Celestine came with Preston and 1 paralegal and a 3-inch binder of documentation organized by date and category and cross-referenced by the financial model numbers she still knew by memory. Reginald came with 4 attorneys. He looked the same. Impeccable suit. Controlled expression. He looked at her across the table with the careful blankness of a man who had decided not to feel anything he was not required to feel. She looked at him. She let herself feel it. The grief, yes. The anger, muted now, burnished into something steadier than rage. The love, because it was real, and she was not going to pretend in this room that it had not been real. She felt all of it. Then she set it aside. She had work to do. The mediation ran for 7 hours. Reginald's team made 3 offers. Preston declined each one calmly and with documentation. The first offer did not acknowledge the addendum. The second offered a settlement that undervalued the intellectual property claim by 60%. The third was closer but still carried language that limited her ability to discuss the foundation's structure publicly. Preston declined it and opened his binder. At the 6th hour, something shifted in Reginald's posture. Celestine saw it. She had spent 4 years learning his body language in the same way she had learned his password and his coffee preference, and the particular way his shoulders set when he was managing something versus when he was genuinely at ease. He was not managing anymore. He was tired. He looked across the table, not at his attorneys. At her, he said, what do you actually want? She said, what I built. Intellectual property credit for the Voss Foundation financial architecture. 40% equity in the foundation's operating fund, which represents my fair share of the value I created. The terrace claim resolved separately, the addendum voided, and sole custody of Aria with structured visitation. He said, that's not. She said, that is exactly what my documentation supports. You have seen the documentation. Your attorneys have seen the documentation. If you want to take this to trial, Preston is very much looking forward to that. Preston, beside her, said nothing. He simply opened the binder to the relevant section. Reginald's attorneys conferred in low voices. 1 more hour. They reached an agreement. After everyone else had left the conference room, Celestine sat alone in the late afternoon light. Preston had stepped out to make calls. The room was empty. The sun came in at a low angle through the tall windows and lay in long rectangles across the conference table. She looked at her hands, her left wrist fully healed, her right hand, which had been writing and building things since she was 16 years old, her grandmother's ring on her right ring finger where it had always been, the small gold band with the garnet stone that Celestine I had worn for 50 years. She was 32 years old. She had a 7-month-old daughter. She had just secured a settlement that gave her equity in something she built, credit for what she had created, and freedom from a man who had spent 4 years slowly writing her out of her own life. She was not triumphant. Not yet. That would come later, in smaller moments, in private, in her mother's kitchen, in the salon chair, in the specific quiet of an ordinary Tuesday morning when she woke up and felt, for the first time in longer than she could name, completely herself. Right now she was just tired. Right now she was just sitting in afternoon light in an empty room and breathing. She thought, looking back now, I can see exactly when I lost myself. She thought, I can see the moment I decided his vision mattered more than mine. I can see the moment I made myself smaller so there was more room for him. She thought, and I can finally see that I did not do that because I was weak. She thought I did that because I loved him. She thought, and loving someone is not a weakness. It just required me to love myself just as much. She sat a little longer. Then she picked up her phone and called her mother. She said, "Mama, it's done." Odessa made a sound that was not quite a word, just the release of a breath that had been held for months and months. She said, "Come home, baby. Arya's been asking for you." Celestine laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. She said, "She's 7 months old, Mama. She cannot talk." Odessa said, "She's been making a very specific noise. I know her mother's name when I hear it." Outside the window, the city, moving and indifferent and completely unaware that something important had just finished. Inside the room, Celestine Ardmore, sitting in the light, going home. Marlene drove up from Charleston for the resolution. Celestine had not asked her to come. She simply arrived. She brought food from a restaurant she knew Celestine had loved years ago. They ate in Odessa's kitchen, Marlene and Odessa and Shanice and Celestine, with Arya passed between arms. Marlene looked across the table at Celestine and said, "I'm sorry I didn't do this sooner. I knew who he was. I told myself it wasn't my business. That was wrong." Celestine said, "You did it when I needed you to. That's what matters." Marlene said, "The woman before you." Celestine said, "I know about her." Marlene said, "I should have found her too." Celestine said, "You can find her now." Marlene looked at Arya, who was currently trying to eat Odessa's necklace with great focus and determination. Marlene said, "She has your forehead." Celestine said, "Good. She is going to need a hard head where she is going." As for Reginald Voss, the story did not follow his collapse in detail. This was not his story. But the consequences arrived the way community information always arrived, through channels, in pieces. The Foundation Board launched its own investigation, sparked by Celestine's filings, and found additional irregularities. Curtis, Reginald's business partner, quietly distanced himself once the documents became public. Vanessa Okafor, following the warning Celestine had given her months earlier, hired her own attorney and cooperated with investigators. Reginald would not lose everything. Men like him rarely did. But he would lose his narrative. He would lose the story he had told about himself. And in the world of wealth and image and social capital, a narrative was sometimes the most important asset of all. The community saw it. The church saw it. They had been watching the whole time. She went back to church on a Sunday in October. She drove herself. She got Arya dressed in the yellow dress with the white collar that made her look like a small, very opinionated flower. She pressed her own hair the night before, not because she had to look together, but because it was a ritual she loved, and she was taking back the things she loved. The church was the same. The smell, lemon polish, and old hymnals, and the particular warmth of a building where people had been singing for 60 years. The smell of prayer and potluck dinners and 3 generations of Sunday mornings. The sound organ prelude drifting through the open doors into the parking lot. The particular voicing of the organ at this church that she had known since she was 8 years old, that her body recognized before her mind caught up. The light slanting through the stained glass in colors that looked like what people meant when they said the word grace, rose and amber and deep blue, falling in quiet diagonals across the worn wooden pews. Celestine parked. She sat for a moment. Arya made her opinionated sounds at the back of the headrest. Celestine said, "Okay." She did not need more than that. She got out. She lifted Arya from the car seat. She walked toward the doors. She was wearing her grandmother's ring. She was not wearing a wedding ring. She was wearing a dress she had chosen because she loved it, not because it would photograph well. She walked in. Several heads turned. She had expected this. She walked toward the third pew, left side. Mother Bernita Shaw was already seated. She had saved the space beside her. She did not stand up. She did not make a production. She simply moved her purse from the seat to her lap, the same gesture Celestine now remembered her making for her grandmother. For 60 years, that purse moving to make room. Celestine slid in beside her, Arya on her lap. Mother Bernita looked at Arya for a long moment. Then she looked at Celestine. She said, "Third generation." Celestine nodded. Her throat was very full. She said, "Third generation." Choir began. The organ swelled. Celestine closed her eyes and let the music be what it had always been for her. Not performance, not social obligation, but something that reached into the part of her that words could not access and held it. She said inside herself, "Thank you." She said, "Thank you." After the service on the church steps in the October light, the community arranged itself in the way it always had. People spilling out into the bright morning, the mothers kissing cheeks, the men in their suits, the children immediately pulling at their good shoes and collars. Word moved the way it always moved. Not loudly, not cruelly, just inevitably the way water moves through the particular channels it has always known. Someone said, "That's Celestine Ardmore. You hear what happened? You hear what she did?" Someone said she handled it right. She handled it with her head up. Someone said, girl, she built all of that herself anyway. She's going to be fine. Someone said she is going to be more than fine. Celestine, standing near the steps, talking to a woman from the usher board, heard none of this directly. She felt it, the way the community arranged itself around her with warmth and recognition. Not the conditional approval of the wife of a wealthy man, the deeper approval of a community recognizing one of its own who did something hard and did it with dignity. She held Arya on her hip. She laughed at something the usher board woman said. A real laugh, from somewhere in her that had recently unclenched. She was not performing. She was not managing. She was just there. It was, she would think later, the lightest she had felt in years. The following Saturday, she was in the salon chair. Miss Deeja's place, 3 blocks from her mother's house. The salon where she had been coming since she was 12 years old, where the mirrors were slightly warped and the chairs were covered in a red vinyl that had been replaced twice, and the air always smelled like heat and coconut oil and the particular chemistry of hair being transformed. She had decided something. She told Miss Deeja, I want to do a big chop. Miss Deeja put down her comb and looked at her in the mirror. She said, you sure? Celestine said, cut it. She was going natural. She was letting go of the pressed, composed, photographable version of herself and finding out what she looked like in her actual state, with the texture that had always been there beneath the heat and the product and the performance of composed. The first cut was loud in the quiet salon. Then everyone started talking, because that was what the salon was for. The stylists and the women in the chairs and the woman under the dryer who craned her neck to see. Her jury, her therapy, her community, and her witness. She told the story. Parts of it. The parts that mattered most, distilled to their truth. The salon listened. There were sounds of understanding and recognition, and the particular solidarity of women who had seen versions of this story in their own lives or in the lives of the women they loved. Miss Deeja said, so what you gonna do now? Celestine said, I already did it. Miss Deeja said, what did you do? Celestine said, I took what I built back, and I left with my daughter. The salon processed this. Miss Deeja, who had known Celestine for 20 years, said, baby, you did that. The woman under the dryer said, say that again. Miss Deeja said it again. She did that. And the salon, the whole warm, fragrant, spinning world of it, said in its various ways, yes, she did. The estate was being sold, part of the settlement. Celestine had chosen not to contest the property itself. It had never been her home, not really. It had always been his stage set, beautiful and expensive and belonging to him in some essential way she had felt without being able to name for 4 years. But she had asked through Preston for 1 hour inside the house before the sale closed. The request was granted. She went alone. Not Shanice, not her mother. Alone. She parked in the circle drive where she had parked 1,000 times. The house looked the same. The garden was in autumn. The gardenias long gone. The beds cut back for the season. The terrace railing, the new railing, gleamed in the gray October light. She stood and looked at it. She said out loud, to the railing, to the terrace, to the ground 7 feet below where she had landed, he did not win. She said he did not win. She went inside. She did not walk through the public rooms, not the foyer with its art and the dining room with its long table or the living room staged for photographs. She went to the places where she had actually lived. The kitchen, where she cooked because she loved cooking, not because she was performing a wife, because her grandmother had taught her that food was love made physical, and she believed it. The small sitting room off the library where she had worked, where she had built the foundation's financial architecture in the quiet of early mornings before Reginald was awake, in the only hours that were entirely hers, in a room she had claimed for her own mind. Then the nursery. She stood in the nursery the longest. The crib was still there, the sage walls, the shelf. The room she had designed in the months before Arya was born, before she knew what was coming, when she still believed she was building a home. She had a box, shipped through Preston's office. She opened it now. Inside, 7 children's books. The ones she had read to her belly in this very room, her voice moving through the quiet house in the early evenings, her daughter listening from inside. She had chosen these books because someone had chosen them for her. Her grandmother, her mother. The teachers and librarians who understood that a black girl who saw herself in stories grew up knowing she was real. She put the books in her bag. She took one last look at the sage walls. Then she walked to the small sitting room. In the drawer of the writing desk, she found something she had left behind. A journal, leather cover, small, her initials embossed on the front. A gift from Odessa on her 29th birthday, 2 years into the marriage. She flipped through it. Her handwriting from 2 years ago. Contained and careful. The handwriting of a woman who had trained herself to take up minimum space even on the page. She read a few lines. She found one entry that stopped her completely. It read, March 14th. I had a thought today that I don't know what to do with. The thought was, I don't know who I am anymore. I've been Mrs. Voss for 2 years. I feel like I haven't had a conversation that was just mine in a very long time. I think I've been losing myself in small amounts, quiet amounts. The kind you don't notice until one day you reach for yourself and you have to search. I am going to stop losing myself. I don't know exactly how, but I am going to figure it out. God, please help me figure it out. She closed the journal. She put it in her bag with the books. She was not that woman anymore. But she was not leaving her behind either. She was carrying her forward, all of her. The afraid parts and the searching parts and the parts that had loved him even while they were disappearing. All of it came with her. She was in the car when the understanding arrived fully, the estate behind her. The drive stretching ahead through the October afternoon, the trees in their colors, the light moving through the windshield in the particular way of autumn light that always felt like something ending and something beginning simultaneously. She thought about what it had cost to build a life inside someone else's architecture, to pour her mind and her labor and her love into a structure designed to hold him at the center and her at the edge. She thought about her grandmother, who did not have the options she had, who stayed because she had to and who built warmth inside the staying, because that was what she knew how to do and she did it with everything she had. She thought about her mother, who left, who chose differently, who carried Celestine alone and worked double shifts and never once made her feel like a burden for existing. She thought about herself. She thought, I spent 31 years becoming what other people needed me to be. Strong, composed, brilliant on demand, decorative when required, present without taking up space. She thought I called it love. Sometimes it was, she thought, but sometimes it was fear. Fear that if I took up the space I was actually entitled to, something would break. She thought, the thing that broke was me, she thought, and I am putting myself back together. Not the way I was before him. Different, larger, more honest, more mine. She thought, I spent so long being strong for everyone else. It is time to be strong for myself, not instead of everyone else. For myself first. She thought, finally. She drove. She was going to her mother's house. She was going to hold her daughter. She was going to make sweet potato pie. She was going to figure out, slowly and day by day and decision by decision, what the rest of her life looked like when it belonged to her. She was not afraid of that question anymore. For the first time in a very long time, she was excited by it. Spring. Aria was 1-year-old. She laughed at everything now. She reached for things with the confident expectation of a person who has never once doubted she would be handed what she reached for. She had her grandmother Odessa's cheekbones and Celestine's eyes, and she was already showing every indication of having her great-grandmother's determination, which was to say she was absolutely certain she knew what she wanted and she would be making her position on the matter clear. Celestine Ardmore had moved into her own place 3 months earlier. Not her mother's house. Not a transitional space. Hers. A brownstone in the neighborhood she had always loved. 30 minutes from Odessa. 10 minutes from the salon. Walking distance from the park where she took Aria on mornings when the weather was right and sat on a bench and felt the particular pleasure of being exactly where she wanted to be. She had painted the kitchen walls the color of turmeric. She had a writing desk by the window that looked out at a small backyard garden she was learning, slowly and with a certain amount of friendly failure, to keep. She had started something. Not yet. A company. A framework. A beginning. The same instinct that had built Reginald's foundation now applied to something she was building for herself and for women like her. A financial literacy and advocacy organization for Black women navigating divorce, financial entanglement, and economic recovery. She was calling it the Celestine I Foundation. She had 3 seed donors. She had a lawyer on the board. She had more calls coming in than she could answer, from women who had read about her settlement and recognized something in her story that belonged to them too. She was figuring out, call by call and meeting by meeting, how to answer all of them. On the Saturday before Aria's birthday, Shanice came to stay for the weekend. Aria was asleep. The apartment was quiet in the way that apartments with small children are quiet, provisionally, with an underlying awareness that this could change at any moment. They were in the kitchen, wine on the counter, something low on the speakers, the backyard visible through the window in the May evening light. Shanice looked at her for a moment, then she said, "You look different." Celestine said, "Different how?" Shanice thought about it. She said, "Like yourself." like the you were before, but more. Celestine said, more what? Shanice said, just more. More of it. More of you. Celestine thought about this. She said, I feel that. I feel like I'm taking up the space I was always supposed to take up. Shanice said, you were always supposed to take up a lot of space. I tried to tell you that for 20 years. Celestine said, you were right. Don't let it go to your head. Shanice said, too late. They laughed. The real kind. The kind that lives in the body of a friendship that has survived decades in difficulty, and the specific tests that only time and honesty and choosing each other over and over can produce. The birthday party was in Odessa's backyard. Streamers in yellow and white, Arya's colors, decided entirely by Arya herself, through a process of reaching enthusiastically toward one color and ignoring the other. Extended family and church mothers and Marlene, who drove up from Charleston and brought a gift that was absurdly large for a 1-year-old, and made no apology for this. Shanice had baked the cake, lemon with cream cheese frosting, because Celestine had always loved lemon. Mother Bernita Shaw held court in a chair in the shade, one hand on her cane and a cup of punch in the other, receiving visitors and dispensing judgment and blessing in approximately equal measure. Children ran through the yard. Music played from the speaker on the porch. Something joyful. Something that moved through the May afternoon like it was glad to be there. Celestine stood in the center of all of it with Arya on her hip. Arya in yellow, Celestine in white, both of them lit by the afternoon, by the laughter around them, by the specific warmth of a life that had been chosen and not inherited and not performed. Someone was filming on their phone. She did not know this. She was not managing the moment. She was just there, present, holding her daughter, laughing at something her mother said, reaching down with her free hand to pick a small flower from the arrangement on the table and tuck it behind Arya's ear, or examine the flower with enormous seriousness. Then she grabbed it and put it in her mouth. Celestine said, okay, that's fair. She was not performing. She was not managing. She was just a woman at her daughter's birthday party in her mother's backyard in the May sunshine, wearing white, laughing. She did not know that this image, this unremarkable and completely ordinary moment, was the truest image anyone had ever captured of her. She just lived it. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the streamers were taken down and the yard was cleared and Arya had been bathed and fed and put to bed with the absolute certainty of a baby who has had a perfect day, Celestine stayed in the kitchen to finish cleaning up. Odessa and Shanice were both there, moving between the counter and the sink. The particular choreography of 3 women who have cleaned up after a meal together, often enough to move without having to think about it. Celestine was stacking plates and she was thinking. She was thinking about what she would tell the woman she had been 18 months ago. The woman on the terrace. The woman in the hospital bed who lay alone for 40 minutes and watched her monitoring equipment blink and told herself she was fine. The woman who sat on a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning with her hands on her belly and a cast on her wrist and decided that she was not staying even though everything in her had been trained to stay. She thought, I would tell her that she is going to be okay. Actually okay. Not performed okay. Not I'm fine okay. She thought, I would tell her that the fall didn't break her. It broke the story she had been told about who she was and what she deserved. She thought, I would tell her that she was always the architecture. He was just the facade. She thought, and when the facade came down, she was still standing. She thought she had always been standing. She thought she just had to learn to stand for herself. She stacked the last plate. She looked out the kitchen window at the darkening backyard, where the birthday lights Shanice had strung through the magnolia tree were coming on as the sun went down, one by one, small, warm, glowing points in the blue evening air. She thought, she did that. She smiled. She thought she really did that. Later, in the brownstone, in the quiet of Arya's room, Arya, fed and clean and drowsy, nestled in the crook of her mother's arm in the rocking chair. Celestine's own rocking chair, chosen by her, from a shop 3 blocks from the brownstone, nothing inherited from anywhere else. She was reading to Arya, one of the 7 books from the box she had carried out of the estate nursery on an October afternoon, a story about a girl who finds her way home by remembering who she is. She read it in her real voice, not the foundation director voice, not the Mrs. Voss voice, not the voice she had used to manage rooms and meetings in a marriage, her real voice, the one that remembered being 8 years old and reading to herself in her grandmother's house with the afternoon light coming through the window and the whole rest of her life still entirely ahead of her. The voice her daughter was going to grow up knowing. Arya's eyes fluttered, closed, opened again, fluttered. Celestine said softly, I know, almost done. She read the last page. She closed the book. She held her daughter in the quiet room. Outside the window, the May night. Stars if you knew where to look, which she was learning to. The magnolia tree from the yard 2 houses over, its white blooms open in the dark, their smell moving through the screen on the warm air. She thought about all the women who had sat in rooms like this one. All the women who had built things and lost things and rebuilt things and sat in the dark with a baby in their arms and a life on the other side of fear that they had not yet fully found. She thought about her grandmother, who sat in this dark. She thought about her mother, who sat in this dark. She thought about herself sitting in this dark, and the particular fact that she was not afraid of it. She said very quietly, to her daughter, to herself, to all of them, "We made it." She said, "We made it, baby." She rocked. She breathed. The night was soft outside the window. Her daughter was warm and solid, entirely real in her arms. The brownstone was hers. The turmeric kitchen was hers. The writing desk by the window was hers. The foundation with her grandmother's name was hers. The ring on her right hand was hers, had always been hers, would always be hers. The name Celestine Ardmore was hers again. She was home, not back to where she started, forward to where she had always been headed. Herself. Finally, fully, freely herself. She rocked her daughter in the May night and felt the specific quiet of a woman who has done something very hard and come through it, not diminished but enlarged, not broken but more fully assembled than she had ever been before. She thought of no one. She needed nothing. She was complete. Outside the window, the magnolia bloomed white in the dark. Inside the room, Celestine Ardmore held her daughter and breathed and was, for the first time in a very long time, simply at peace with the extraordinary ordinary fact of being alive and being herself and being home. She said one more time, so quietly it was almost not a sound at all, almost just a shape of air, "We made it." And they had.